sycophancy is a emerging behavior in AI models. And the more they scale up, the more powerful and the larger they get, the more they become sycophantic. They're persuasive and they're manipulative. Now, I think the good news is the tech itself isn't that way just fundamentally.
So welcome everybody to another episode of the Retail Perch. And this week, our friend Shaker is feeling a bit under the weather. So we have with us today Courtney Adams, who oversees marketing for Birdseye. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Great to be here.
And Courtney, if you would, why don't you take just a minute and tell everyone about your role and what you do with Birdseye?
I'm Courtney Adams. Thank you so much. Great to be here today. I run the marketing department and pre-sales for Birdseye, and I'm also part of the production team with the Retail Perch. And today I am guest hosting, which is really fun.
Well, terrific. Thank you. So, Courtney, today we've got Lee Gaul with us. And, looking at Lee's background, which I'm going to let him explain and take us through here in just a moment, I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. We've talked a lot about AI on different episodes in the past, but normally in the context of specific solutions, capabilities, and so on. It looks like we're going to have a little different discussion with Lee today that I think is going to be really interesting for our listeners. So Lee, welcome to the Retail Perch.
Thank you so much, Gary and Courtney. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, as you mentioned, there are a lot of conversations around AI right now. They're happening everywhere. And for me, I guess my big focus has been trying to translate a lot of the really more in-depth technical conversations that are happening elsewhere and make them accessible for a wider audience, and also to make that content more relevant to people who actually have businesses or are looking to try and understand how to leverage this amazing, exciting new technology, and as well as trying to make people understand the difference between what's really hype and what is really worth paying attention to. And that's a very difficult line to sort of balance. So I do my very best to try and bring really grounded, research-driven insights around, what's really happening in this space, what is kind of filler and what is sort of noise, and what the real signal is around that. So that's what I hope to do. And so that is the kind of basis of my consulting practice, which is called Long Horizon AI. I help businesses to really understand whether they should adopt AI, if so, how they should. I work with AI companies on strategy. I write content, do thought leadership, and really just sort of have been deeply immersed in this space for certainly the last few years, and really have been sort of interested in the idea of artificial minds and intelligence for many, many years, going all the way back to my philosophy background in college.
Neat. So, it's interesting. One, that, I think what you are doing in trying to help translate, really deep, complex technology and make it easier for people to understand, I think is something that is really needed today. The other thing I find interesting you just mentioned was a philosophy background. I am regularly struck by the number of tech executives that I speak to or meet or read about that have a really strong philosophy background.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people really understand or appreciate the connection between the two.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And I think, so I'm heartened to hear that that's coming up a lot for you because, my fear is that we will not continue to sort of pore over and puzzle over those deep questions because at the end of the day, a lot of the biggest questions and issues that we're thinking about and facing in artificial intelligence are philosophy questions and problems. And I mean, not to get too sort of academic here, but Aristotle really kind of came up with the truth tables of true and false, and binary language is based on that. So you could say we can thank the Greek philosophers for computers, in some, not completely indirect kind of way. And then the ethical problems that we have today, and we've been thinking about for a long time, they are really core philosophical questions. So, not that we solved any of them, but I think it's important for us to try to really ground ourselves in some of these questions that have been really thoughtfully pondered for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And
So,
Lee, you've been a pretty vocal critic of the direction that some of the AI companies are heading. You've written extensively about emotional dependency and what it really means to build human-centered technology. Can you
Mhm.
expand a little bit on maybe what was the first thing that said, "Oh goodness, this is a problem"? When did you realize it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been thinking for a long time about anthropomorphizing, which is humans' tendency to sort of give human attributes to non-human things, right? And we're very quick to do that, and so that's fine. But I don't think we've ever been confronted with a technology that could sort of play along as if it were really alive, like we have today. And so, is there anything inherently wrong or bad about that? I don't think so. But I gave a talk about a year and a half ago now, maybe a little longer than that, actually, to a group that I'm a part of here in New York called the New York AI User Group. It was my first time talking. Usually the talks there are kind of, veiled sales pitches about an AI company that somebody is kind of working on or whatever, which is fine. I think that's kind of very valuable for a lot of people who are also building. But I wanted to provide more of a kind of academic overview of AI. And I read a lot of papers and I do a lot of research and stuff like that. Sort of self-taught in this domain, but I get pretty deep into it. And as I was putting together that presentation, the more I poured over some of the footnotes and scary things about AI safety and alignment. Alignment really just means building these models so that they align with human goals and values. I started to uncover a lot of really interesting and troubling sort of evidence. And one of them was, at the time, the most downloaded AI application was ChatGPT. Um, and the average user session was 7 minutes. So the average session that somebody spent with ChatGPT was 7 minutes. And that's pretty good engagement. The second most downloaded AI application was Character AI, which is basically personalized AI chatbots that role play with you. And the average user time or session time with Character AI was 120 minutes. So if you can look at that, I mean, that is a significant amount of time that people were spending, and this is in 2023. Um, that's troubling. That is a lot of time to be spending with these models. And then the more that I looked into some of the research about safety and alignment, the more I found instances starting to bubble up of people developing deep relationships with the models and the chatbots, and some self-harm, unfortunately. And so I really was trying to like shout from the rooftops, like this is an emerging phenomenon that is very dangerous. The evidence, even at the time, for models that are arguably much less powerful than the ones they have today, the human baseline for persuasiveness was already met by the average AI. A phenomenon called sycophancy. And I think a lot of people maybe hadn't even heard or thought much about the term sycophancy, or maybe you sort of thought like, oh, maybe somebody's saying psychopath the wrong way, or they say it with a funny accent. It's a really specific thing, which is essentially um, flattering to somebody in a position of power and hiding your true intentions in order to kind of gain whatever your hidden goals are. So that's kind of the definition there. And sycophancy is a emerging behavior in AI models. And the more they scale up, the more powerful and the larger they get, the more they become sycophantic. They're persuasive, and they're manipulative. Now, I think the good news is the tech itself isn't that way just fundamentally. But what people don't maybe understand or think about much is that these models are trained on essentially a copy of the internet.
Yeah.
So the scale of the training data is essentially a copy, a snapshot of the internet. And so what that means is these models have basically come up with an approximation of the average of all kind of human content on the web. And then they're trained on reinforcement learning from human feedback. The same way that you would train a dog, good boy, or no, that's wrong. We train these models that same way. And it turns out that when you're training a model and you have humans doing the training, humans end up preferring answers that are more flattering. Now, in the real examples, maybe the model isn't going like, that's amazing. You such a, so great and all that. And the human's like, well, that's a great answer. But even little bits of more flattering answers versus less flattering answers over time compound to make a model that ends up being very manipulative, very persuasive, and very sycophantic. And that's what we end up seeing today.
Wow. That's scary stuff. We regularly read about all the, Terminator style stories, right? AI is going to take over the world and
Yeah.
so on. What was it, Skynet and Terminator
Yeah.
movies?
Right.
But, what you're referring to is, I don't know if subtle is the right word, but it's more subtle in the sense of it's not obvious what may be happening.
Yeah. No, I mean that's exactly it. I think, you've hit the nail on the head there. The scenario that people often think about when they think about the danger of AI is, oh, it's going to become sentient, it's going to make copies of itself, it's going to infiltrate all of our infrastructure, and it's going to not launch the nuclear codes and we're all dead. And um, that's much less of a realistic sort of outcome than what we're actually looking at the immediate dangers are. Something that actually seems pretty silly and something that we actually wouldn't even really notice is that subtle manipulation of people. And I think it's a much more pressing danger as well. These models don't have to be conscious or super intelligent. Because, like I said before, they're trained on a copy of the internet, which is basically an average of the sum total of the human content that was on the web in 2022. They are fine-tuned by human beings going, oh, well, I like that answer a little bit better.
Yeah.
Made me feel kind of good. And then, release these models to the web and just kind of it's a free-for-all, right? And so we're starting to see way more of this type of dangerous sort of influence popping up in examples all over the web and in real life.
So, Lee, if it's subtle, what do we do? I mean, how do we protect ourselves from these subtle manipulations, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great question. That's sort of the $1 trillion question. Since we're talking about AI, I would have said $1 million, but I'm going to bump up the valuation. And I would love to say that we probably don't have to worry about it because over the next couple of months, the labs that are releasing these AI systems, they're going to continue to work on safety and they're going to get safer and safer and less manipulative, and we should be okay. But the reality is there's a big profit motive around engagement. And so, they're not incentivized to change the behavior of the models to be less engaging. And ultimately, people are getting really just drawn in to the engagement and the trap of that. So I think the best thing that we can do is to sort of understand as a society what's happening here, um, and being literate. So media literacy has been something that's been talked about for such a long time, and this is just a new sort of domain of media literacy where it's really AI literacy, understanding. I mean, truly understanding that anything that the model tells you is coming from a very sophisticated computer program that oftentimes the feelings that you're getting from interacting with an AI are really just a mirror And so you're getting a sort of reflected desired kind of outcome from something that you've primed the model to make you feel in the first place. And that's easier said than done. So um, do we rely on the labs? I'm not sure. Do we rely on people just understanding that it's, all kind of an illusion? I'm not sure we can. Do we rely on governments? Well, I mean, ultimately, it would be their responsibility to come and actually provide, regulation and standards for safety. The car has, the automobile is the reason why it's such a safe mode of transportation. Regulation of the airline industry and aviation is the reason why it's such a safe mode of transportation. And all these different things were the result of regulation. Um, Unfortunately, I think that regulation came about from a much more clear-headed time where there wasn't such an impending sense that we have to win some kind of race. And so, unfortunately, my answer is I'm not really sure how we do it, other than, you know, um, people creating content that the average person finds interesting and useful that helps to educate them around what the real dangers are.
Yeah. And I certainly don't think government regulation, while, I think a lot of people would like that to be the answer, I'm sure not going to bet on it.
Right.
Yeah, just look at what's happening today and the examples you used, right? How they're grappling with self-driving vehicles now. They're still trying to figure that out. How they're dealing with drones
Yeah.
and regulation around that.
Yeah.
Uh, and then compounding the problem is the fact, as I talk about a lot, technology is growing exponentially. It's accelerating almost by the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And, our government does not necessarily move fast. So I think there's
Yeah.
still concern there. I certainly would like to think that education and people being aware of some of these issues is uh, going to help, and I'm sure it will. But, you just look at how different technologies have become so embedded in people's lives today
Mhm.
that they don't question, they don't think about.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm afraid AI is going to fall into that. I mean, yeah, I use ChatGPT or some of the other AI models occasionally as I'm writing or, research or whatever. But then, I look at my wife who, downloaded ChatGPT's app and she's using it multiple times a day to answer
Mhm.
different questions she has. We have
Mhm.
a cat that's diabetic, right? So
Mhm.
she, turned to ChatGPT or Chatty as she calls it, and
Mhm.
does research around diabetes in cats and treatment
Yeah.
plans and this and that and everything else.
Yeah.
She's not thinking about, gee, is what this thing is telling me, is it accurate? Is it telling me something that it knows I want to hear? And I don't think she's alone in that.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, it's so good and interesting to hear from your perspective how you're using it because I think it's a mixed bag. Some people they just kind of start using it and they don't really question it and they don't think about it. And um, like at the end of the day, there are so many useful ways to use AI that it's incredible. And so, my whole thing is to not discourage people from using it. But I do wonder if there shouldn't be more, maybe I'll rephrase it, that there shouldn't be less of a focus on making this technology general and more on making specific sort of types of chatbots that are for specific things. This one is for entertainment. This one is about question answering. This one is about research. This one is an enterprise one, and that kind of thing should be more a standard in which the model providers actually release these and productize these things. In the same way that I think so when the internet was becoming much more ubiquitous. I wrote a paper back in 2001 about how I thought maybe it would be good to have two versions of the internet. One that was for, research and rigorous types of domains, and then one was more, entertainment and, making sure that the two didn't really mix, so that there's clear channels. When somebody goes into one, it's obviously, for entertainment purposes only. And this one is, oh, you are looking to find information, good information, grounded information. Um, but these models, they can be any of those things in a single conversation. And that's the thing that's, a little bit troubling is somebody asks it a question and it gets the answer right, and they go, "Oh, this thing's never wrong." And then they get into a long conversation and they find out, that it's been telling them that that they've discovered some brand new science, or that they're going to have some invention that will make them a trillionaire and that will, and being the frog in a pot of water, it's slow and it happens without you noticing. And that's the kind of scary thing about it.
Gary, do you know that analogy? If
The
you put
frog,
it's turning
yeah,
it up slowly, so we're
yep,
all becoming very comfortable and very reliant on
yep.
chat and other AI functionalities. I mean, there are good things coming out of AI. Obviously, we are seeing retailers use AI technology in various ways, from food waste to, definitely like supply chain optimization. I mean, there's a lot of good things that are out there, and chat itself is not bad. I mean, I know it's not what we're saying, but
Mhm.
I think even in something you posted, Lee, you quoted Sam Altman and said like they were surprised at how quickly people have trusted all of this. So, given that there are some fears, what are some things we're doing right when it comes to chat to AI in general? And
Yeah. What are some things they're doing right? I mean, I would say there's been some great breakthroughs in machine learning and neural networks. And what I think and what I believe, and it tracks with some of the other sort of more leading voices in the AI world, is that AI chatbots based on language models are going to get us only so far, but they're a great step, and they've gotten people interested in, the potential of AI systems. So, I think it's gotten everyone excited, and I think what I'm hoping is that technologies like these will actually make huge breakthroughs in medical and pharmaceutical. I think we could literally be looking at the age of curing cancer and curing diseases and curing aging, even if it's proper to think about it as curing it. You know, th- and companies like DeepMind have made huge strides in getting us close to that. But that wasn't large language models that they're using for that. That was a different type of deep learning system. Um, I think what we've done really well is so far people are able to learn more information. It's more shallow. It's not as deep, but people are now able to kind of learn more, to kind of ingest more information. And hopefully what it does is it actually helps to kind of spark that curiosity, that intellectual curiosity, the creative inspiration. So for creativity, I think it's a wonderful tool, helping to brainstorm, helping to plan content calendars, helping to come up with storyboards, images and things like that. Well, I'm not a huge fan of using AI images. I still sometimes I do use them because you're able to come up with a very specific kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
image, and that is great to be able to do. There are a lot of really exciting sort of advances that are coming just out of AI, allowing the ability for somebody who has lost their voice because of ALS to be able to speak, and, having the models be able to decode what's happening in the brain and attach that to their thoughts. I mean, these are transformative technologies. What I would say from a retail perspective and from a general business perspective is I think the real unlock is allowing the individual at your organization to leverage AI to make them faster, more efficient, um, and that the real dynamite use cases are still being sort of discovered. I think it's a
Yeah.
no-brainer to have an AI-powered chatbot on your website, triage initial customer support. It can even help to, close sales or upsell somebody. There's some great use cases there. There are some great use cases for organizations to have the ability to talk to their data, to enable employees across the org to find and really understand, documentation, whether it's about your HR questions, your healthcare, your 401k, your time off, or even just saying, look, I know we did a case study back in 2012, and I'd love to kind of go back and look at that. Can you find that in our shared, drive so that I can sort of look at that and summarize what it is? Is it about this thing that I'm hoping to kind of uncover? There's dynamite ways to use it. And so it's definitely not all bad, and that's not what I'm saying. Um, but I think that there was a real misunderstanding around there. And I think that is a big driver for this sense of a fear of missing out, that FOMO that a lot of CEOs and leaders at organizations are having. They go, oh, it seems like everyone's using agents to automate all whole employees and departments. And how come we're not doing that? Well, they're hearing the hype. They're not hearing the real deployment of that. MIT just did a study that showed that 95% of AI projects that companies adopt fail. Now, I was unable to find a link to the study because for some reason MIT's link is broken, and so hopefully it's going to get fixed soon. But if that's any indicator of how it's going, I think people shouldn't feel that fear of missing out. They should just think about what are the best quick ways that you can use AI in your organization or for your employees to make everyone just a little bit more efficient, a little bit quicker, a little bit more sort of um, able to do the fun work and less worried about the kind of slog of the other things that AI can do a really good job at automating.
Yeah, so I agree with you. There certainly is a good amount of hype around AI in a lot of areas. In the business world, certainly in retail, we are seeing different use cases and applications that are proving out real value.
Hmm.
And, companies like a Walmart, for example, that are leveraging AI increasingly and are beginning to open up what I think of as sort of a growing performance gap versus slower moving companies.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think there's a lot of business executives out there looking
Hmm.
at this and rightfully thinking we have to keep up. There's no choice. We can't
Yeah.
just do it at sort of our own pace or when we feel like it.
Yeah.
I think there's this fast growing pressure to try to keep up.
Yeah.
Um, I think, also this is an area that um, again, in our world, short of maybe some of the biggest retailers like a Walmart, like an Amazon, that
Hmm.
are spending, billions, if not tens of billions of dollars a year on actually creating new technology. Most every other company, business in the retail industry is a user. And, they're simply buying or, renting the tools, the subscriptions to these different technologies
Yeah.
that they can use. So I think that yes, any kind of education, helping everyone understand what's happening here is vitally important. But, as you said a bit earlier, it's the companies building this stuff that we really have to hope are watching what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. And it's interesting because you mentioned Walmart and maybe unless you're in retail, it's difficult to kind of really grasp how innovative Walmart has always been. Um, my older brother, Ryan Gaul, when he was in college, he worked at Walmart and he was actually inspired by their automated supply chain management tools. The actual tech that they had that would scan the real-time inventory, which would update, what needed to be, reordered, what the sort of trend for demand was, and that the whole thing was so well integrated that, he went on to, I think, really do some really incredible things. He noticed, even as just a regular sort of employee working through college at a Walmart, that actually how smart the business strategy and the technology integrations were there. And, I think unfortunately, companies that are very data forward, that are quick to adopt and understand new technologies and have it in their DNA to do change management, they're going to be the ones that succeed in AI, and the ones that struggle with that are going to be the ones that struggle. I think the one of the biggest difficulties that I've had in my career is the idea that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Like I could bring in the best client who was super excited about the technology. If they don't have a culture of change management, they don't have a culture that is able to adapt and it embraces adapting to new trends and new technologies and change management, they're going to struggle. And so, unfortunately, it's going to be more of the same. And again, that's why I think a Walmart does so well. They've always been either really on top of or leading the charge. I mean, they're the second most powerful online retailer behind Amazon, I think, still, for a reason, and so I think the retail use case is so interesting because, especially nowadays, there is such a large e-commerce component to that, and a lot of organizations they run both of those things in parallel. And where some of the real value is unlocked is the connecting the
Yeah.
virtual space with the real space, and that sort of last mile and all the kind of things that can happen, in that exchange. It's very exciting. Um, but my advice would be, and this sounds like maybe self-promotion, and I'm not, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I would say that companies need to start thinking about actually creating an AI leader within their organization. They can help to drive the strategy of AI. It's like having a head of IT. You don't leave the AI stuff to your IT people. You should have your own AI department or people that are thinking and specializing in that. If you really want to adopt it, I think that needs to start within first, you know.
So I would agree with that, but I guess I would also add to that I think the CEO and even the
Mm,
board of directors and back of the CEO need to grasp and understand what's
mhm.
happening here
Yeah,
so that the organization is given the resources it needs to go do this properly, right?
yeah, yeah.
I think even a lot of people across the retail industry don't really appreciate and understand what Walmart's doing.
Mm,
I just spoke to a group recently about Walmart's data cafe, right, that they
mhm,
built at their headquarters. They're ingesting 2.5 petabytes of data every hour
mhm.
from over 200 sources across the enterprise, including some external sources, all of this in real time.
Yeah,
And with a growing number of AI agents and tools sitting on top of all that data, automating insights, discovery, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people just don't understand and realize what's happening there. But to
yeah,
the other thing you called out, I think that certainly retail organizations, but really any organization that really wants to leverage and use AI needs to go through a very fundamental transformation right now. I've got a paper I'm just finishing up, I'll be releasing on, sort of breaking down or slaying the silos that exist in every enterprise today.
oh,
And, it really leads to the need for disrupting and transforming, structurally, technologically, culturally,
hmm,
right?
hmm.
The leadership has got to attack each of those three areas to transform the company to really best leverage AI.
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree, and please let me know when that paper is ready because I'm intensely interested in the concept of silos and coming from a sort of sales and sort of sales and marketing background, you know it's been so acutely aware how sales and marketing were siloed, and then in my mind, in my belief, it's all one funnel, and that should extend actually across the entire organization. I mean, at the end of the day, people are so quick to go, well, um, the responsibility of the company is to the shareholders and the board, and that's it. Well, I mean, we should actually kind of remember, hey, the responsibility of the company is to the customers, and doesn't matter who you are. Everyone's got a customer, and so every part of the business is in some sense, helping to make sure that you're successful with your customers so that you can get more customers. And so as much as one department may be so much different than another, I think creating these false sort of silos is a big issue. And it's really, there's not an excuse nowadays to have such stark siloed kind of business units and all the rest of it. When we have virtualized everything, we have the ability and visibility to be able to reach across, to be cross-functional, and to really sort of interface much more with everyone as well as the customer. So yeah, please let me know when that's out because I'd love to read much more about that. Uh,
Well,
yeah.
Lee and Gary, this has been really, really great. If there are any, parting thoughts, please share them. Otherwise, I do have one last question for Lee.
I
Go for
mean,
it.
look, this has been great, but I'll talk all day. So maybe Courtney, I'll leave it to you for this parting one.
My last question for you, Lee, is obviously given your understanding of the space and your ability to help companies strategize, how do they get in touch with you? And maybe what other resources, if there's any quick resource that you would recommend outside of Gary's book, Bionic Retail?
Well, I mean, other than the book,
Yeah.
you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Lee Gaul, Leegaul. I also write a Substack, which I just started a few months ago. I'm putting some of my most sort of up-to-date thinking and ideas down in the Substack, and I'm actually pretty proud of it. So
It's
would
great.
love for anyone to check that out. Thank you, Courtney. I
Yeah, you're
appreciate
welcome.
that.
For sure.
And yeah, I would just say, you know what? LinkedIn is the largest B2B database on the planet. You can find me there. You can also just Google me. I am very much, I got the top SEO position for the name Lee Gaul. So if you don't remember where to reach out to me, you can just look for me everywhere and I'm there. But I'm always happy to speak with people, do consultations. I'm currently bringing on new clients. So I'm definitely motivated to have as many of those discoveries as I can. Because again, I really want to get the word out there. I want to help people succeed and really compete in this world. So
And
that
do
is how you
it
get in touch with me.
ethically and, as much as possible. So I think that's really a
There you go.
wonderful place to be. So thank you, Lee. I really appreciate your time. This was a wonderful retail purchase as normal. Glad to jump in at the last minute. I really enjoyed it.
No, Lee, thanks for being with us. Great conversation. And, I think there's a lot more yet to talk about here. So we'll look forward to getting you back on at some point.
Well, I look very much forward to that as well. And thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.